it can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
We are filled with unity, optimism, and optimism about 2024.
When will you announce your re-election, sir?
When I announce it.
How much do you believe a Trump endorsement matters?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I think our voters always make their own decisions, and they consider, obviously, endorsements. And at that time, when he was president, his was the big enchilada.
We have to make certain that not only the U.S. House, but the U.S. Senate and the White House are going to be held by Republicans.
2024 already heating up. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thanks for joining us. President Biden is reaching out to his Democratic colleagues on Capitol Hill this week with back-to-back appearances, all with a likely re-election bid on the horizon. After a meeting between the president and senators today, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said they are, quote, filled with optimism about 2024. And last night, the president gave a speech at the House Democratic retreat, pushing lawmakers to tout the party's legislative accomplishments that they say they've had over the last 2 years. So for more on this, let's bring in Nicole Killian and Ed O'Keefe. Nicole is CBS News congressional correspondent. She is in Baltimore, Maryland with Democrats, and Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent joining us from the North Lawn. Great to see you both. Nicole, I want to start with you because you were on Capitol Hill earlier today during this meeting, and you actually got that question into Biden that we heard in that clip. What did he have to say about what he discussed with Democrats today?
Well, you know, he didn't really go into a lot of detail about his discussions with Democrats. Of course, the question we pressed him on was the one that everybody wants to know, which is when he intends to announce his re-election, if he has made a decision about whether he will run for re-election. And while certainly aides around him and many congressional Democrats expect that he will make that decision, as you heard him say, you know, he will announce it basically when he announces it. So obviously not tipping his hand there, although his wife did make clear when she was traveling abroad recently that she is all for it should he decide to run again. But that being said, you know, a lot of what he discussed with Senate Democrats was similar to what he discussed with House Democrats, Democratic priorities and their agenda, you know, touting some of the accomplishments they have made, whether that is the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure law, but also not only trying to sell that message as they head into 2024, but also the legislative agenda ahead. You know, obviously the debt limit is still unresolved, so that did come up in these meetings. The president did make clear that he may be supportive of a new rail safety bill that was just introduced yesterday by a bipartisan group of senators that would prevent future toxic train derailments like what we saw in East Palestine, Ohio. And he also told senators that he will not veto an upcoming measure that the Senate will vote on perhaps as soon as next week that deals with D.C.'s criminal code. This is something that has already passed the House and will be up for a vote soon in the Senate. So again, the president indicating he won't veto that measure.
And Ed, I mean, Nicole is mentioning that, you know, Democrats want to tout successes, but they're also heading into these next 2 years with divided government and Republicans in control of the House. So how does Biden, you know, plan to sort of keep that up? I mean, there's still a lot that they seem to have to implement from, you know, previous legislation.
And that's the focus, is focus on the implementation, focus on selling what we did get accomplished with united, complete Democratic government, and you know, pick and choose some potentially important and more modest pieces of legislation that allow us to look like we're doing something to help people or that help us politically at home. I think this D.C. home rule issue, which is a complicated thing to understand if you don't live here in what we call the DMV, the District, Maryland, Virginia area, is a good example of that. Basically, the president today telling these senators, I'm told unprompted, that he would not veto a Republican piece of legislation that reverses a D.C. City Council law, changing some elements of the criminal code and, in essence, reducing sentences for things like carjackings and some other violent crimes. The mayor didn't like that idea. Remember, D.C. isn't a state, and Congress can review D.C. passed legislation. The president, realizing what's going to happen here, opted to announce unprompted that he would support that law, reversing the changes made, in order essentially to avoid the accusation that Democrats, and especially those Senate candidates in red or purple states in 2024, are soft on crime. Joe Manchin, John Tester, Bob Casey, Angus King, all of them in tough re-election races next year, should they choose to run. We're waiting to hear about Manchin and King. Signaled that they were likely to join Republicans in supporting that. And the president, realizing he can give them political air cover today, seems to have opted for supporting that move at the expense of D.C. statehood, which Age here reminded us today he's been supportive of for decades. So that's the kind of 2024 play that's going on here, is coming up with ways to avoid some of the attacks that might come their way from Republicans, neuter them as much as possible, and then find ways to work with Republicans where it makes sense.
Yeah, and Ed, you actually, as you mentioned, asked about that during the briefing. I do want to play a little bit of that sound.
Is the president playing 2024 politics with this local Washington, D.C. issue at the expense of his longstanding, decades-long support of D.C. State?
What I'll say here is not going to get into 2024 analysis or political punditry from here. We are covered, I am covered, we are covered by the Hatch Act, as you know, and so I'm certainly not going to get into analysis from here.
Yeah. So, Ed, I mean, this is the difficulty for the president, right? Kind of navigating this kind of landscape. And we often hear from the press secretary that she's not going to talk about politics from the podium.
But she had, by laying out the president's views on this and making clear that he thinks it's important to be tough on these kinds of things and to not be reducing sentences for crimes that have seen an uptick, especially in this city, but in other big cities across the country. So she had already done that. But when asked explicitly about it, suggested, oh, no, there's no gambling going on in this establishment at all.
Right. Of course not.
If you follow the gist.
Absolutely. And Nicole, I want to switch gears a little bit because we have some news today that the House Ethics Committee has opened an investigation into Congressman George Santos. This is pretty big news. What are the next steps for the Ethics Committee panel on this? I mean, we had all been waiting to see what they were going to do, and McCarthy was also waiting to see what they were going to do.
Yeah, well, significant but not surprising. You know, this was something where we knew there was certainly a good possibility that the Ethics Committee would open an investigation into George Santos. Part of why it may be happening now is simply because the Ethics Committee had to be put together and had to be organized. Of course, we're still kind of in the early stages of this Congress where a lot of committees are just kind of starting their initial steps. The Ethics Committee, no exception. And so, of course, today they announced that they are launching this investigation into Congressman George Santos and going to be looking into a number of things, you know, whether or not he engaged in unlawful activity with respect to his campaign, whether or not he failed to properly disclose required information on statements that were filed with the House, whether he violated federal conflict of interest laws, and whether or not he potentially engaged in sexual misconduct towards an individual who temporarily worked for his office. So there is a lot that this panel is going to dive into. Obviously unclear what the timetable is, how long it will take for the Ethics Committee to go through this investigation and go through all those various level areas of interest. But the congressman did respond in a tweet late this afternoon saying that he will comply with this investigation. But certainly this is one, as you know, Caitlin, many investigations that the congressman is embroiled in.
Yeah, and we'll see where those lead. This could take a long time, as you mentioned. Ed, I want to talk about East Palestine because you kind of have this connection with lawmakers on Capitol Hill asking for answers, Republicans urging the president to go there. It seemed like you tried to get some clarification about whether Biden is planning to visit the site of that train derailment. What's the White House saying? I mean, could that trip happen?
They didn't rule it out, but there are no immediate plans. And I think, Caitlin, this is a good example of what we were talking about earlier. Hit Republicans where it makes sense, neuter their arguments or their attacks when you can, but work with them when you can as well. And the president signaled today in his meeting with Senate Democrats he supports the now bipartisan legislation that's been put forward by Ohio's 2 senators and 6 total, 3 Republican, 3 Democrat, to try to address some of the concerns raised by the East Palestine derailment. That kind of modest but big headline-grabbing legislation is what the president's looking for, and it was a good example, essentially, of why he went up there today to say, you find examples like that, get them to my desk as fast as you can. I'm happy to work with you on it.
Yeah, interesting to see if that's kind of the roadmap going forward. Nicole Killian and Ed O'Keefe, talking to you a lot from Capitol Hill to the White House over the next couple of years. We appreciate your time. The Justice Department says former President Trump can be sued by injured police officers and lawmakers over the January 6th Capitol attack. DOJ prosecutors declined to back Trump's efforts to claim immunity from civil suits holding him responsible for the insurrection. In a court filing, they said the former president could be held liable for physical and psychological injuries. Well, CPAC is underway and not only making headlines for who's there, but really for who isn't. How those skipping this year's convention could affect the race for the 2024 Republican nomination. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming racism.
I feel like it's just a war zone between all different races.
Will this generation continue the problem?
The kids pushed them away and didn't want them to be there because of their race.
Or be the solution?
We just need to keep raising our voices. We're all human and we don't deserve that type of treatment just because of how we look.
Are the kids all right? Racism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. Well, CPAC is in full swing, and while former President Trump and many of his allies flocked to that conference, several high-profile Republicans who are expected to jump into the race for the 2024 nomination are actually skipping the event. Among those staying away, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former Vice President Mike Pence, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, and Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. Well, joining us now from the conference in National Harbor, Maryland, are Finn Gomez and Aaron Navarro. Finn, of course, is CBS News political director, and Aaron is a CBS News political reporter. Good to see you both, even though I saw you both there just this morning when I was there as well. And what's so striking about this year's conference is kind of the people making news for not being there. Finn, I'm wondering what you make of these kind of high-profile figures like Pence and DeSantis skipping this kind of event.
Yeah, CHP, greetings from National Harbor, Maryland. This is my 10th CPAC in all of the years, fifth presidential cycle. This is one of the most unique ones that I've covered so far because simply it is really revolving around one candidate, and that is former President Donald Trump, who's really, a few people talking to us just a little while ago told us that this was really the Trump show. And that's what it's really turned out to be, not only because of all the signage and the people that are here, former Trump officials, former Trump campaign officials, people associated with Trump. We saw Steve Bannon here, Donald Trump Jr., others. But also because, the point you state, CHP, is the fact that it's really a story about who's not here. And a lot of those folks, a lot of those 2024 potential candidates are somewhere else. And where they are is in Trump's home state. They're only 3 miles away from this other retreat that's happening, this donor retreat that's being held by the Club for Growth. And guess who was not invited? And that was Donald Trump.
Finn, that's fascinating because you kind of have this counter-programming going on. And it's interesting to see those potential candidates kind of staking out their claim, especially in Florida. Aaron, I want to go to you because, we're talking about those, high-profile people who are not there. But Nikki Haley, who is actually the only other declared candidate in this race, is actually speaking at CPAC tomorrow. Why is that? Like, what's her strategy here?
Hi, Caitlin. So for Nikki Haley, who's both going to be at CPAC tomorrow as well as the Club for Growth retreat that Finn mentioned, talking to her camp, they think it's a sign that she can appeal to all Republicans across the base, whether that be in Iowa, New Hampshire, CPAC, or Club for Growth. They make the argument that Haley's trying to get as many Republican voters as she can. She has the profile to do that. So she can go talk to Trump's base here at CPAC and then go talk to other donors that have an open mind in Palm Beach in the Club for Growth retreat. So her and Vivek Ramaswamy, Vivek will be talking tomorrow. And he will not be at the Club for Growth retreat, but it's just a sign that Republican candidates are getting ready to appeal to all sides of the Republican Party as we get 2024 underway.
Yeah, a lot of different constituencies there that they have to navigate in this new party. Finn, what do you make of what you've heard so far today? I mean, when I was there, I was hearing a lot of focus on education and kind of these culture war issues that Republicans have been talking about. Is that kind of more of what we expect?
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of that as also. Of course, this is CPAC. But it really should be called the MAGA convention because you're hearing a lot of these themes that we're hearing a lot from that base, that 20 to 30% of the base of the Republican Party who are fervently backing Donald Trump. And what you're hearing now is a lot of the echoes, a lot of the similar arguments and rhetoric that you're hearing from Donald Trump on the campaign trail, you're hearing here. Again, we heard just a little while ago calls for the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, of even the President of the United States. You're hearing a lot of the same tenor, same arguments, same topics that you would be hearing from a Trump speech. So yes, you are hearing a lot of these culture warrior concepts and themes that we've heard from Donald Trump. Again, CHP, this has really become. CPAC has really trended to more of a Trump show than anything else.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll rebrand next year, Finn, to Trump PAC or MAGA PAC. I like how you described it there. Aaron, I want to talk about another.
Sorry. One quick point. MAGA Inc. is here, by the way. The super PAC that's aligned with Donald Trump, they're here. They have their own kiosks. They're even broadcasting and interviewing people who are here, and people like Donald Trump Jr. is there, and we even saw Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, all these familiar characters that we've seen so often during the Trump tenure.
Yeah, and we'll wait to see what he says when he speaks there on Saturday. It'll be interesting to see if he goes after his rivals. I mean, one of the rivals he's been going after, Aaron, is Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. I know you've been following his book tour in Florida this week. We also know that you have new reporting that he is expected to go to Iowa next week. We know nobody goes to Iowa by accident if you're a politician. What more can you tell us about that trip?
That's right. According to two sources familiar with the planning, Governor Ron DeSantis is going to make his first trip to an early presidential primary state this year. He's going to Davenport and Des Moines, Iowa on March 10th. And these are going to be interview-style events with Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds. And he just hosted Reynolds this past weekend at his retreat to talk about school board races. But if you look that same day, Nikki Haley's throwing events in Iowa. 3 days later, Donald Trump will be holding an event in Iowa. So people are really getting their gear started. But for Ron DeSantis, it's a clear sign. He's really been ramping up his out-of-state political travel. He won't be at CPAC this week, but he will be in Texas and California for fundraisers. He's been starting his book tour in Florida that was just that. Tons of presidential energy, tons of voters that I talked to that think that he can take on and beat Donald Trump in a primary. We will see if Ron DeSantis decides to get in, but there's certainly a lot of energy for him in his home state, and he's about to find out in these next couple of weeks if that energy matches in other states.
Yeah, Aaron, that's exactly what the criticism has been, right? That, whether he can translate that into living rooms in Iowa, where it's a much more intimate kind of environment. Well, I know you both will be out there often for us. So Aaron Navarro and Finn Gomez, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining. And speaking of what DeSantis could mean for the presidential race, it could actually mean that you have two Floridians competing in a presidential primary, perhaps. We'll talk about that with a top Republican consultant from the state. That's next. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women. What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done? We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' book tour continues this week. He was in Jacksonville for another event today. And as we've mentioned before, only 3 declared candidates are so far in that race for 2024, with plenty of high-profile Republicans who are still mulling it over. Well, Justin Safey joins us now. He has served in the administrations of 3 Republican presidents and is a Florida-based Republican consultant. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. I mean, Florida, Florida, Florida always, but even so, more so this cycle where you could have 2 Floridians running in this primary, perhaps. I want to play a little bit of sound from Fox News. They went to this diner in Florida earlier this week, and what they found was pretty interesting.
Rapid fire. Who's your man? Who's your woman?
My man, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Christie, no. Christie, no.
Who's your man?
Donald Trump.
Well, Governor DeSantis. And what about President DeSantis?
I like it. I like it.
Who's your pick?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Trump or DeSantis? I'm either or.
All right, so Justin, I mean, Florida is DeSantis' territory. He just won it by 20 points in this past election, but there's still those who are very clearly loyal to the former president. So how do you imagine this playing out? Are Floridians, especially Republicans, going to stick by their governor? Or are they still open to Trump or other candidates?
I think it depends on the campaign. I think Governor DeSantis has a legislative session coming up in Florida, and the conventional wisdom is that he's going to continue being governor, but this pre-campaign campaign, I call it, where he's going on a book tour, as we heard earlier on the show. He's going to be going to Davenport, Iowa next week and doing these trips across the country as a part of his book tour is like a pre-campaign campaign. In terms of Trump versus DeSantis, I think we won't really know the answer to that until Governor DeSantis enters the race and the campaign begins in earnest.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has already been going after DeSantis. He's given him a nickname, which shows that he's, in his sights. I think he's calling him DeSanctus recently. Do you expect DeSantis to fire back soon? I mean, you mentioned he's focused on the legislative session. Is that kind of the strategy?
I think it's a real dilemma for Governor DeSantis because it's, the rule number 1 in politics is you never let any attack go unanswered. And he's trying to stay above the fray. He's trying to be governor and not become part of the presidential campaign, which I think is the right thing for him to do. I think the danger, though, is receiving these attacks and not being able to respond in kind. But I think that he's doing the right thing by focusing on being governor, getting some legislative accomplishments that he can tout when he goes on the campaign trail whenever he does get into the race.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of when he does get in, I mean, we're not sure of a timeline, but you mentioned he is going to Iowa. I mean, in the past segment, we were talking about, this question of can what he does in Florida with these huge media markets and kind of bigger crowds really translate to the kind of campaigning that you need in Iowa? I mean, everything that you know about his style of politics, can you imagine him appealing in a place like Iowa or New Hampshire?
Absolutely, I can. I mean, look, Florida is a big, diverse mega state. We have a lot of different constituencies from the panhandle of the state of Florida, where you have a much more conservative southern type voter, all the way to Miami and the diversity of all the different communities that reside in Miami. And he's shown the ability to win and to win independent voters as well, and this, as we saw in this most recent election. So I also say, though, that the presidential campaign is a gauntlet like no other. So you really never know how anyone's going to do in a presidential campaign. But I will say, winning 2 elections in the state of Florida, I think, is a great way to develop the skills you need to win anywhere across the country.
Yeah, I mean, history has a lot of examples of candidates that look great on paper, but once they get in, it's a different story. I wanted to ask you really quickly, because yesterday I spoke with former Vice President Mike Pence about supporting Trump, and he wouldn't commit to supporting him if he's the nominee. I'm curious what your reaction to that is, and kind of what you assess in terms of Trump's power over some of these potential candidates.
Sure. Look, I don't think if I were running for president, I wouldn't answer that question. It's a hypothetical, and if you're thinking about running, the only thing you're thinking about is how do I win? And the question, really, the premise of the question is, well, what happens if you lose? So if I were running for office, I would never answer that question for that reason. In terms of the campaign and the other Republican candidates, look, we have a former president who's run 2 times before, and he's running for his 3rd election. A lot of these candidates are going to be asked their positions relative to President Trump, and that's something they're going to have to figure out, how they define their own political character and not being defined by where they stand in relation to President Trump.
Well, we will be watching all of these candidates and hope that takes us to Florida often. Justin Safety, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Caitlin.
And that does it for us today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
People from every corner of